Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine and the penultimate week of Dan's epic wine route as I check out wine from my trip along the Absa Cape Epic. If you watched last week, my tirade against South African Airways, you'll know that the wine we're filming didn't arrive here at Ellerman House, where I'm filming for a few weeks, and so I'm taking advantage of the sommelier here, Vianney, who is Chile's most famous export since Alexis Sanchez. Now, Ellerman House has got a great record with its wine. They've got a superb wine list. It's a terrific place to come and stay, and if you do stay here, most of the rooms are about the size of Lesotho. Throw in a great view and you're in for a very special time. But my favourite part of Ellerman House is here in the wine cellar. It's a beautiful cellar, it's a unique cellar, and it's home, thankfully, to some terrific Elgin wine that I touched base with when I was in Elgin on the Epic, and which I'm now able to catch up with here. With one exception, because of the 4 wines I'm trying today, one is completely new to me. To be honest, I didn't even know it existed until Vianney passed it on to me and said, Dan, you should try this. And if Vianney says try it, you'd be well regarded to do so. And what he's given me is something that reminds me a lot of my wife. It's short, it's curvaceous, and it's very attractive. It looks like it should be a bottle of dessert wine. And you're asking, why am I drinking it first? Well, despite the bottle, it's not a dessert wine. It's actually a white blend. It's a 60% Sauvignon Blanc, 40% Semillon, and it comes from the guys at Elgin Ridge. So this is the Chaos White. Unfortunately, you're not going to see a huge amount of it in South Africa. It mostly goes to the export market. But it is a wine that comes with a very high recommendation from Vianney here at Ellerman. It's nothing new in terms of a Semillon Sauvignon Blanc. The Semillon tends to give a bit of structure to the Sauvignon Blanc. The Sauvignon just eases off and smooths the Semillon, so they do make a great pair. And if the bottle is anything to go by, which is most eye-catching, then we should be in for a treat. Now that's a lot of fun to drink. It's not going to be your everyday glass of wine. It's got far too much for that, but this is going to be awfully good with the right sort of food. There's a lot of fruit to it. It's got a very big nose. It'll knock you back just ever so slightly when you try it, but it's a really nice combination. They've got that blend of the Semillon and the Sauvignon Blanc just right. As with so many white wines, this is what, a 2015, so it's probably got some time, but even now, pair this with a nice big curry and you'll have a pretty good competition. Thanks, Vianney. Good start. Our second wine from Elgin is the Richard Hilton Vineyards. Richard brings in his grapes, doesn't have his own estate, but does make some viognier. In this case, is also very highly regarded. The name Emperor Probus, Marcus Aurelius Probus in 281 AD, which is when you would have needed to check in your luggage with SAA for it to arrive today, was the guy who bought the Viognier from Dalmatia through up the River Rhone and introduced it to France over 2,000 years ago. And more than 2,000 years later, Viognier is doing wonders around the world, but I think particularly in South Africa. We've got some guys making some terrific Viognier. The Lismore Age of Grace is a fantastic example of late. And then there's this from Richard Hilton. Again, it's very small, it's something you might not have seen before, but it does come, yet again, with the Ellerman House stamp of approval. So there's a regality to a Viognier. It just always has that aristocratic feel to it. It's smooth, it's polished, it's not making too much of a fuss, but generally comes across as being a really elegant style of wine. It's got a bit of wood to it, as the nose here does suggest, and it's one of many wines I think we need to drink more of in South Africa, moving away from only drinking Sauvignon Blanc. Not that Sauvignon Blanc is bad, but experimenting with more Chardonnay, with more Chenin Blanc, and with more Viognier. And as with the previous wine, when you're drinking with food, this is a really, really nice grape to experiment with. I remember growing up often hearing people ask for a dry white wine. Now, I'm not sure they really knew what they meant when they asked for a dry white wine. They just kind of knew what they liked the taste of, so nothing too sweet. And this is a really good example of a very, very dry white wine. This is Cape Town at the moment. It's as dry as it gets. But just because it's dry doesn't mean it's not full of character. There's still fruit there. There's a little bit of smokiness. There's still that lovely, clean, smooth Viognier feel that just sits so well with food. I'm drinking drinking a lot more viognier at the moment. I'm discovering some new South African viognier. This is the first time I've had this out of Elgin, and that cool climate coupled with the nature of the viognier grape has come together really well indeed. And 2,500 years later, I think Emperor Probus would be quite happy with what's come out of a small corner of South Africa. And still in Elgin, but via Belgium to Germany, if that makes any semblance of sense. This is a Riesling, a grape we associate with the vineyards of Germany. It is in Elgin, but it's made by a Belgian. There are a couple of Belgians that I know of out in the Elgin area. You head down to Almenkirk. Belgians are working some wonders there. This is a guy called Koen at Spioenkop. Now, Belgium's not famous for a great deal. There's Tintin, there's Hercule Poirot, a couple of tennis players, some monks who make beer. But other than that, not a huge number of claims to fame. I think this should certainly be added to that list of honours out of Belgium, because what Koen has done is produce something really nice here. Now, he's known for his pinotage, and he makes some great pinotage. It's a very cool climate pinotage. You drink it, and particularly as 1900, you're often thinking, hang on, is this a pinotage or a Pinot Noir? It's a very cool climate style pinotage. I think it's a fun way to interpret the grape. But what he's done with the Riesling here is also, I think, particularly nice. We don't get a huge amount of Riesling in South Africa. You don't get masses of Riesling outside of Germany, but when it is made well, and it's made in the kind of cool climate that Elgin offers, you do have the potential to come up with something that's not just quirky, but also really nice. Now, we've had a little bit of history already in this episode, so some more, not quite so old, not Roman emperors, but we'll go back to 1900, the Battle of Spioenkop Hill, part of the Boer War, and it's that hill in KwaZulu-Natal that's very similar to a hill in Elgin, and that is what has led Koen the Belgian to label his wines as such. And while his pinotage often takes centre stage, this is something that I think deserves a fair amount of attention. Riesling, a little bit less alcohol, a little bit fruitier. It's certainly not the dessert wine that some people occasionally think it is, but it's just a wine that's got a bit more fruit to it. And if you can imagine, you're sitting in a cold German winter, so about 10 months of the year, surrounded by lots of other people from Germany, so you need something to lighten the mood and make you laugh and smile, then this might be something to do the trick. Close my eyes and I'm wearing lederhosen. It's just a cool wine. It's got a bit of sharpness to it. That'll soften off, I think, in a little while. It's got some nice fruit to it. There's a real richness to the wine. There's texture to the wine. You can feel it sitting on the palate. It's not just simply washing off. And it's a wine that's just fun to drink and give you a slightly different take on a white wine grape. Koen's put a lot of effort into making a Riesling that takes advantage of the climate in Elgin, and it's a climate that German producers would be familiar with, and I think if they drank this, they'd nod and say, you know what, you've done Riesling proud here. And then to our grand finale. I spent some really interesting time with winemakers on this year's Epic. I had a superb lunch with Caroline Martin out at Creation. David Finlayson gave me a real treat of some vintage wines, particularly his older Pinot Noir Beauchard Finlayson. And I spent some time out at Lismore with the fantastic Samantha O'Keefe, discovering some of her newer additions and looking at a new cellar. But in terms of a learning experience, it was hard to beat the time spent with the Kershaw team. Now, Richard Kershaw isn't just a wine master, he's an alchemist, he's a scientist. I often think he's almost fringe autistic if you look at how he makes wine. He's kind of like the Rain Man of wine. When you look at the detail, the attention, what he does with wine, looking at the clones, the varieties, how they work, what goes in a first fill, a second fill, a third fill, stuff most of us don't really understand, to be honest. And when I was getting my lesson, there were many periods when I was nodding wisely and not entirely understanding what was going on. But when I took some time to think about it and look back, what it said as a whole was that here is somebody in Richard Kershaw who is putting so much time into the art of making wine that it does become exactly that, a work of art. Now, it tastes fantastic, as so much South African wine does, but when you understand the story, when you know what's gone into it, and you see just how much detail there is with this particular wine and how it's produced, you can only be amazed at the dedication of somebody who is so committed to the final product. You can see we've gone for the bigger glass here, the glass that'll give the Chardonnay the full treatment, that huge mouth, the big feel, the lovely palate. And with a Richard Kershaw Chardonnay, you really do want to make an effort to give it the chance to showcase what it has to offer. You'll see on what I think is a really nice label. It's simple, it's uncluttered, it's got the clonal selection on it, and such care has been paid to exactly which grapes are used in terms of what Richard Kershaw is making. Not a huge amount of production, you're looking at about 9,500 bottles, so it's reasonably limited, and it's not inexpensive. Buy this in the shop, it's probably going to cost you about 350 Rand or thereabouts, so it's not the kind of bottle you can buy every day. But if you want a marquee wine that's something a little different in terms of what people know of, but is really setting the standard of how we're making South African Chardonnay, then here's your wine. And fair to say, I am seduced, not for the first time. Tried this in a little tasting room in Elgin, probably the most inauspicious tasting I've had in terms of location. It looked like we were there for a board meeting of a down-on-its-luck company, but within the fairly modest room came out some terrific wine, some incredibly friendly people, and the chance to explore what Richard Kershaw is doing in Elgin. There is more to come. I believe there's a tasting room that's on the cards and further developments, but all of that is coming off an incredibly strong platform of really well-made wine by somebody who knows exactly what he's doing. And this Chardonnay, with its richness, with its fullness of flavour, with its nice big feel to it, is just such a great example of why Chardonnay is something you must be drinking, whatever your preconceptions might have been beforehand. So that's wine from across the Elgin region. I'll be back with 4 more. We've tried 4 whites this week. Next week, to wrap up Dan's epic wine route, it's 4 bottles of red from the Elgin Valley that's fast becoming, I think, not just one of my favourite places to drink wine, but somewhere the world is starting to sit up and take notice of. From Ellerman House, cheers.